I couldn't sleep. The digital clock on my nightstand showed 02:17 hours, its red numbers glowing in the darkness of my barracks room. My mind kept returning to that mission from 6 months ago. Not the firefights in Baghdad or the IED sweeps in Ramadi. Those had their own compartment in my head. This was different. The ceiling fan turned slowly above my bed. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what had happened. Most nights, I convinced myself I'd imagined the weird parts. Tonight wasn't one of those nights. It started with a knock on our door at 0300. We were stationed at Fort Carson then. Me, Ryan, Jacob, and Sean, operating as a quick reaction force team. I'd been dreaming about fishing at my uncle's lake when Sergeant Mills banged on our door. "Wilson, get your team up. Captain wants you in the briefing room in 15. I rolled out of bed, already reaching for my uniform. "What's going on?" "Some extraction in Nevada, that's all I know." I woke the others, and Ryan groaned into his pillow. "If this is another training exercise, I swear I'm putting in for a transfer." We dressed quickly, moving with the speed of men who'd done this 100 times. The hallway lights were harsh after the darkness of our room. I rubbed sleep from my eyes as we walked into the briefing room. Captain Lewis stood at the front, looking more serious than usual. He wore his ACUs with the sleeves rolled up, a folder tucked under his arm. "Gentlemen, I have unusual orders for you." He opened the folder. "You're being tasked with a civilian extraction in northern Nevada." Jacob leaned forward. "Civilian extraction, sir?" "That's right. You'll be provided coordinates to the extraction point, but details are minimal. Your equipment is being loaded into 2 Humvees as we speak. You leave in 30 minutes. Sean raised his hand. "Sir, who exactly are we extracting?" The captain glanced at his folder. "A civilian. That's all the information I have." I didn't like the sound of that. "Rescue operations usually come with more details, sir. Medical status, reason for extraction." "I understand your concern, Sergeant Wilson, but these orders come from high up. You have your mission. Dismissed." Outside the briefing room, Ryan shook his head. "This is weird. Since when do they send a QRF team for civilian rescue?" "Maybe it's a VIP," Jacob suggested. "Someone off the books." Sean laughed. "Or maybe some general's daughter went camping and got herself lost." I didn't laugh with them. Something felt weird about this, but I kept quiet. "Gear up. We roll in 20. We packed quickly. Standard gear, plus extra medical supplies, since we had no idea what condition our target might be in. The motor pool was quiet at that hour, just a couple of mechanics helping load our equipment into the Humvees. The drive was long, through Colorado into Utah, then up toward Nevada. We took shifts behind the wheel. Ryan used the GPS coordinates we'd been given, taking us further into the desert. "Probably some lost hiker," Ryan said during our second hour on the road. "Or an injured camper who wandered off trail." "In northern Nevada?" Sean called from the back seat. "There's nothing out there but dust and sagebrush." "Could be research scientists," Jacob offered. "Geologists or something." I kept my eyes on the dark highway ahead. Whoever it is, they need help. That's all that matters. Around noon the following day, we received our only mission update via secure channel. I remember the exact words because they made no sense. "Target is a female civilian reported missing approximately 60 years ago. Extract and transport to location of her choosing." Ryan laughed when I relayed the message. 60 years? That has to be a typo. Maybe they meant 6 days, Jacob suggested. Or 6 months, Sean added. I rechecked the transmission. No, it says 60 years. Has to be a mistake. We joked about it for a while. About extracting a 90-year-old woman who'd been living off the land for 6 decades, or finding a time traveler, or maybe a ghost. The jokes helped pass the time, but they also hid how worried we were getting. The first strange thing I noticed happened that night. We were driving through western Utah, the radio playing some country station to keep me awake at the wheel. The signal suddenly cut out, replaced by static, then silence. I tried other stations. Nothing. Jacob was asleep in the passenger seat, so I reached to check the GPS instead. The screen showed nothing but an error message. Signal lost. I tapped it, then checked the sky through the windshield. Clear night, stars everywhere. No reason for signal loss. A minute later, both the radio and GPS came back on like nothing had happened. I might have brushed it off as normal technical issues, except it happened 3 more times that night. By morning, we crossed into Nevada. The landscape changed to vast expanses of scrubland and distant mountains. There was nothing out there. No houses, no gas stations. Just the occasional unmarked dirt road branching off the highway. The jokes stopped sometime during the second day. Each of us got quiet, thinking about what we might find. Even Sean, usually the most talkative, just stared out the window at the desert going by. "We're about 20 miles from the coordinates," Ryan announced late that afternoon, studying the map. "Should reach it before sunset." The last stretch took us off the highway onto increasingly smaller roads until finally we were following what was barely more than a dirt track through the sagebrush. The Humvees handled it fine, but we felt more and more alone with each mile. "This can't be right," Sean said as we bounced along. "There's nothing out here." But Ryan checked the coordinates again. "We're headed to the right place, whatever that is." The track ended at the bottom of a low hill. According to the GPS, our destination was just on the other side. We parked the Humvees and continued on foot, weapons ready even though we'd been told this was just an extraction. The hill was easy to climb, mostly hard dirt with some brush here and there. From the top we could see a big field stretching out in front of us, just tall grass and wildflowers moving in the afternoon breeze. It looked completely empty. "Check your coordinates again," I told Ryan. He looked at his device, then pointed straight ahead. "That's it, right in the middle of that field." I raised my binoculars and looked around the area. Nothing at first, just grass and more grass. Then I spotted it, and I froze. In the center of the field, maybe half a mile away, was a splash of color that didn't belong. I adjusted the focus on my binoculars. It was a person sitting in what looked like a folding chair, the kind you'd bring to a picnic, just sitting there in the middle of nowhere. "I've got eyes on someone," I said, passing the binoculars to Ryan. He looked, then handed them to the others. Each man's face changed from doubt to confusion. "Is that an old woman?" Jacob asked. Through the binoculars, I could make out a woman in what looked like a dress. She sat perfectly still, facing our direction as if she'd been watching the hill, waiting for us to show up. "How the hell did she get out here?" Sean asked. "There's no other vehicles for miles." I had no answer for that. None of us did. "Let's move in," I ordered, switching to tactical mode because it was easier than confronting how impossible this situation was. "Standard approach. Keep alert." We headed down the hill and into the field, walking in formation through the grass that came up to our thighs. As we got closer, we could see the person better. It was an old woman, sitting quietly in a metal folding chair in the middle of nowhere. She had on an old blue dress that looked like it was from another time, with her white hair tied back in a neat bun. The weird thing was how she didn't seem surprised to see us at all. No look of relief that someone found her. No fear of armed men coming at her. She just sat there with her hands in her lap, watching us approach with what looked like a small smile. When we were about 50 yards away, I signaled everyone to slow down. Something felt off. The woman looked too calm, too put together. She showed no signs of being out in the weather, for what must have been days, and she had nothing with her. No water, no food, nothing for shelter. "How is she even alive out here?" Jacob whispered. I had no idea. But as we got closer and I saw her face clearly, it looked old but somehow not damaged by the sun or wind, I knew for sure we'd found exactly who we were sent to get. A woman who had been missing for 60 years. We moved through the tall grass, staying close together like we'd practiced. The ground was bumpy under our boots, with small rocks and dips hiding in the grass that came up to our thighs. Sweat ran down my back as the Nevada sun beat down on us. I took the lead, signaling the others to spread out a bit as we closed the final 30 yards to the old woman. "Ma'am!" I called when we were about 15 feet away, lowering my weapon to appear less threatening. "I'm Sergeant Wilson with the U.S. Army. We're here to help you." Up close, she looked even more out of place. Her faded blue dress might have been fashionable decades ago, with its modest neckline and hem that fell below her knees. Her white hair was pulled back neatly, every hair perfectly in place even with the breeze blowing through the field. Most striking were her eyes, alert and clear, looking at each of us with quick sizing-up glances. "Well, aren't you boys right on time?" she said, her voice strong and steady. She stood up from her folding chair without any sign of stiffness or effort. "I'm Martha, and I'm ready to go home now." Ryan looked at me with raised eyebrows. Jacob and Sean traded looks behind us. The woman's calm acceptance of our presence made no sense. We were miles from any road or town, in an empty field that went on for acres in every direction. "Ryan, confirm with command that we've located the target," I said quietly. Ryan nodded and stepped back, speaking into his radio. Jacob and Sean moved to check the perimeter, looking around the field and the surrounding area for any signs of how this woman got here. A vehicle, a campsite, anything. I turned back to Martha. "Ma'am, can you tell me how long you've been waiting out here?" Her smile didn't waver. "Since 1963, young man." My arms went cold even in the heat. 60 years. Exactly what our mission brief had said. I tried to keep my face blank and professional. "That's a long time," I said carefully. "How have you managed to survive out here? Do you have supplies nearby?" Martha smiled wider. She didn't answer, just looked at me with that same pleasant expression, as if I'd asked her about the weather instead of how she'd survived for decades alone in the wilderness. Ryan came back. His face looked calm, but his eyes told me something was wrong. "Command confirms this is our target," he said. "We're to transport her to her requested destination." I nodded and turned back to Martha. "We have vehicles just over that hill. We'll take you wherever you need to go." "Elko," she said. "I live in Elko, Nevada." Sean approached, having completed his sweep of the immediate area. "Sergeant, there's nothing out here. No car, no supplies, not even footprints leading to this spot except our own." I looked back at the chair Martha had been sitting in, a simple metal folding chair, the kind you'd find at a picnic. There was nothing else. No water bottle, no bag. Nothing to suggest how she'd survived or how long she'd really been here. "Let's pack up and move out," I said. "Ma'am, do you need help walking to our vehicles?" "That would be kind of you," Martha said, extending her hand. I took her arm to support her, thinking she'd be heavy like most older people, but I almost pulled too hard. She was super light. Her skin felt cool and dry, even with the hot sun on us. Jacob picked up the folding chair, checking it out with an unhappy look before he folded it up. "This isn't rusted or weathered at all," he whispered as he fell in beside me. "Looks brand new." I gave a small nod, filing away the observation with the growing list of things that didn't add up. We made our way back over the hill to where our Humvees waited. The walk was slow, not because Martha had trouble with the terrain, but because each of us was watching her, trying to make sense of her presence here. Do you have an exact address in Elko? I asked as we approached the vehicles. 637 Juniper Street. Martha replied without hesitation. The white Victorian with the blue trim. Can't miss it. Ryan pulled out a map and checked it. That's about 600 miles southwest of here, sir. I helped Martha into the back seat of the first Humvee. Her dress didn't make any noise as she sat down, and the vehicle didn't move at all with her weight. You boys are very kind, she said, folding her hands in her lap. I knew you'd come eventually. How did you know that, ma'am? I asked. Martha looked out the window at the empty field. Some things you just know, like how you know when it's going to rain before the clouds come, or how you know when someone's watching you in the dark. I closed the door and took a second to pull myself together before turning to my team. They stood around me, their faces showing different levels of confusion and worry. We'll take her to Elko, as ordered, I said, keeping my voice low. Ryan, you navigate. Jacob and Sean follow in the second vehicle. Standard transport protocol. Standard protocol for what? Sean asked. Transporting a woman who claims she's been sitting in a field since before any of us were born. For completing the mission, I replied firmly. We don't need to understand it. We just need to execute it. The words sounded hollow even to me. Nothing about this was standard. Nothing about Martha made sense. But we had our orders, and I'd always been good at following those, even when they led us into the strangest situation of my military career. I climbed into the driver's seat and adjusted the mirror to keep an eye on our passenger. Martha sat perfectly still, her posture straight, her eyes fixed out the window at the field we'd found her in. For just a second, so brief I thought I'd imagined it, her reflection in the side mirror seemed wrong, not the face of an old woman at all. Then she turned and caught me watching, and her grandmotherly smile returned. It's a long drive to Elko, she said cheerfully. We should get started. I started the engine and put the Humvee in gear. I kept thinking we weren't just taking Martha somewhere. She was using us to get exactly where she wanted to go. I put the Humvee in drive and pulled away from the field where we'd found Martha. The ground was rough for the first mile, the vehicle bouncing up and down until we reached what passed for a road in this part of Nevada. Ryan sat beside me, already plotting our route to Elko on a paper map. Jacob and Sean followed close behind in the second vehicle, their headlights visible in my side mirror. The first hour passed in silence. Martha sat in the back, hands folded in her lap, that same blank smile on her face. I kept checking on her in the rearview mirror, watching for... I wasn't sure what. Something to make sense of who or what she was. It'll be around 10 hours to Elko if we don't hit any issues, Ryan said, breaking the quiet. We should reach the main highway in about 40 minutes. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the dirt road ahead. We'll need to stop for fuel a couple of times. There's a station marked on the map near Winnemucca. You boys can call me Martha, our passenger said suddenly. Her voice had a pleasant lilt to it, like someone's favorite grandmother. No need to talk around me. I'm just happy to have company after so long. I caught Ryan's look, a quick look that said he was thinking the same thing I was. If she'd really been alone since 1963, how was she so normal? She didn't look dirty or thirsty, and she didn't act like someone who'd been alone for that long. How did you survive out there, Martha? Ryan asked, turning slightly in his seat. That field is miles from any water source. Martha's smile stayed put. Oh, I manage. Always have. She didn't really answer the question. I focused on driving again, watching the land flatten out. Scrub brush was everywhere, with some rocky spots here and there. The sun was starting to go down. We hit the highway without any trouble, getting onto the smooth road that would take us most of the way to Elko. The quiet drive actually made me feel better. Maybe this would just be a weird transport job, not the strange situation it looked like. That hope only lasted about 4 hours. I first noticed something wrong with the radio. We'd been listening to one of the few stations that came in clearly out here, some classic rock channel playing songs from the 70s and 80s. The music stopped in the middle of a song, switching to a country station even though nobody touched the dial. Before Ryan could reach for it, it changed again to what sounded like a news broadcast, then static, then classical music. "Must be something wrong with the reception out here," Ryan said, reaching to turn it off. But the radio kept changing stations even after he'd pressed the power button. Static, news, music, more static, cycling through frequencies on its own. Martha sang quietly from the back seat, seemingly oblivious to the broken equipment. The temperature was the next thing. The air conditioning had been running at a steady setting since we'd started driving. Now the air coming from the vents turned icy cold. I could see my breath fogging in front of me. Ryan rubbed his arms, looking at the controls in confusion. "What the hell?" he muttered, adjusting the dial. Nothing changed. Then, just as suddenly, the air turned super hot. Sweat popped up right away on my forehead and upper lip. I wiped it away with the back of my hand, trying to keep my focus on the road. "The system's going haywire," Ryan said, fiddling with the controls. "Nothing's responding right." The temperature went crazy for the next 10 minutes before going back to normal, like nothing ever happened. The radio was quiet now. I looked in the rearview mirror to check on Martha. The back seat was empty. I spun around fast to look directly behind me. Martha sat there, exactly where she'd been all along, watching me with a bit of curiosity. "Is everything all right, Sergeant?" she asked. I turned back to the road, holding the steering wheel tighter. "Yes, ma'am. Just checking if you're comfortable back there." When I looked in the mirror again seconds later, the seat was empty once more. Yet I could hear Martha making a soft noise, and I could tell she was still in the vehicle. Ryan hadn't noticed anything unusual about our passenger. He was busy trying to raise Jacob and Sean on the radio to check if they were having similar problems with their vehicle. "Sean, Jacob, do you copy?" Ryan repeated into the handset. Static answered him. I kept driving, trying to figure out what was happening. I thought maybe I was just tired and seeing things. We hadn't slept in almost 24 hours, running on nothing but coffee and adrenaline. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about being tired. After another 30 minutes, we saw a small rest area off the highway, just a gravel patch with a couple of picnic tables and basic bathrooms. I put my blinker on and pulled over, with the second Humvee following behind me. "Let's take 15, I told Ryan. "I need to stretch my legs." As I got out of the vehicle, it was super hot after sitting in the air-conditioned inside. The sun was low in the sky, making everything look orange. I took a deep breath to try and clear my head. Jacob walked over from the second vehicle while Sean stayed behind the wheel. "Everything okay up there?" Jacob asked, his voice low. "We lost radio contact with you guys." "We've been having some equipment issues," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Radio cycling through stations, temperature controls acting up." Jacob nodded, his face getting a bit more serious. "Sean's compass has been acting weird, spinning around like it can't find north." I looked back at our vehicles. Martha was still sitting in the back seat of my Humvee, staring out the window with that same calm look. This was my chance to try getting some real information from her. "Keep an eye on things out here," I told Jacob and Ryan. "I'm going to talk to our passenger." I approached the Humvee and opened the rear door. "Martha, would you like to get out and stretch your legs?" She smiled up at me. "That would be lovely." I offered my hand, again surprised by how unnaturally light she felt as I helped her out of the vehicle. She walked beside me to one of the picnic tables, moving with a grace that didn't match her apparent age. "It's a beautiful evening," she said, looking out across the desert landscape. The setting sun cast her profile in silhouette, making her appear momentarily younger. "Martha," I said, deciding to be direct, "where have you been all these years? Since 1963? She turned to face me, and for a second I thought her eyes caught the sunlight with a weird yellow tint. Then she blinked, and they were normal again, pale blue and cloudy with age. "I was taken," she said simply. Her voice remained pleasant, but something in it had changed, becoming more deliberate. "They wanted to study me, but I escaped. I've been waiting for the right people to take me home." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Who took you? Who are they?" Martha's eyes looked past me, focusing on something far away. "Look at the birds," she said, pointing to the empty sky. "Aren't they beautiful?" I turned to look, even though I knew there were no birds there, just the huge, empty Nevada sky, colored orange by the setting sun. "Martha, there aren't any," I began, turning back to her. "They come and go," she interrupted, her smile unchanged. "Just like people, just like time." She placed her hand on mine, and I fought the urge to pull away. Her touch was cold, like she'd been sitting in a refrigerated room rather than a hot Humvee. "We should continue our journey. Night is coming." She got up and walked back to the car without waiting for me to answer, leaving me with more questions than I'd started with. Ryan came over as I watched her go. "Any luck?" "She says she was taken and studied," I replied quietly. "Wouldn't say by whom." Then she started talking about birds that weren't there. Ryan made a face. "Maybe she's not all there mentally. Trauma, age, dehydration, any of those could cause confusion or hallucinations." I wanted to believe that explanation, but it didn't account for what I'd seen, or not seen, in the rearview mirror. "Let's get back on the road," I said. "I want to reach Elko before midnight if possible." We returned to our vehicles. Martha sat in the same position as before, as if she'd never moved. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, the second Humvee following behind us. That's when the communications equipment really started acting up. The radio came back on by itself, but instead of music or news, it broadcast voices speaking in languages I couldn't identify. Some sounded vaguely European, others completely foreign, full of guttural stops and clicks that didn't sound like any language I'd heard during my time overseas. Ryan played with the dials, but nothing changed the broadcast. "What is this?" he muttered. From the back seat, Martha started making that tune again, a melody that mixed with the strange voices coming from the radio. The combination created a weird sound that gave me goosebumps. The radio in our tactical communication system crackled to life on its own. "Compass is completely useless," Sean's voice came through mid-sentence. "It's just spinning in circles." "Same here," Ryan replied, checking our own compass. The needle rotated continuously, making full revolutions without stopping at any particular heading. "Keep visual contact with us," I instructed, "and stay on the highway. As long as we follow the road signs, we'll reach Elko regardless of compass issues." Night fell completely as we kept driving. Stars covered the clear desert sky. I'd spent plenty of nights outside to know the main star patterns, but now I couldn't find any of them. All the stars I'd always known were gone, replaced by ones I'd never seen before. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things. When I looked up again, the stars were still in weird patterns. It felt like we were driving under someone else's sky. In the back seat, Martha kept singing her strange tune quietly, looking through the window at the weird stars with a smile like she knew them. Around midnight, the lights of Winnemucca showed up in the distance across the empty Nevada desert. My eyes hurt from staring at the highway for hours, and the coffee Ryan and I had been sipping since our last stop had gone cold. "Gas station up ahead," Ryan said, pointing to a small outpost of civilization just off the highway, a 24-hour truck stop with a convenience store attached. The sign advertised diesel, regular gas, and the best coffee in Humboldt County. I put on my blinker and pulled into the station with the second Humvee right behind me. The fluorescent lights at the gas station made everything look too bright and weird. A few semis were parked at the far end of the lot with their engines running while the drivers caught some sleep. "Let's refuel and grab some fresh coffee," I said to Ryan. "We've still got about 4 hours to Elko." I turned to check on Martha. She sat exactly as she had for most of the journey, hands folded neatly in her lap, looking out the window with that same calm expression. "Would you like anything from inside, ma'am?" I asked. She turned to me with her grandmotherly smile. "No, thank you, dear. I don't need anything." The phrasing struck me as odd. Not, "I don't need anything" or "I'm not hungry," but "I don't require anything." As if she were a machine that didn't need fuel. Ryan went to fill the tanks while I headed inside to pay and grab coffee. The store was empty except for a bored-looking cashier watching a small television behind the counter. Country music played softly over the speakers. The normal store scene felt weird after our strange drive. I filled 2 large cups with black coffee and grabbed energy bars for the team. I paid the cashier and headed back outside. The cool night air hit my face as I pushed through the door. I stopped for a second, looking at our vehicles in the gas station's bright lighting. Ryan was finishing up with the first Humvee. Sean stood by the second vehicle, stretching his legs. Jacob was walking around the station on the lookout as always. Martha stayed sitting in the back of my Humvee. I walked toward the vehicle, trying not to spill the coffee cups in my hands. As I got to the driver's side, I glanced at the side mirror out of habit. I froze. The reflection in the mirror wasn't Martha. Where the old woman should have been, I saw something else completely. A tall, skinny figure with skin pulled tight over a long face. Its eyes caught the fluorescent light, shining yellow like an animal's. The worst part was its mouth, open a bit to show rows of teeth like needles, too many to fit in a human jaw. My hands went numb. The coffee cup slipped from my grip, hitting the pavement with a splash. Hot liquid soaked into my boots, but I barely felt it. I spun around to look directly into the back seat. Martha sat just like before, an ordinary elderly woman in a faded blue dress, her white hair fixed nicely. She tilted her head like she was asking a question. "Everything okay, young man?" she asked, her voice warm and concerned. I looked at her, then back at the side mirror. The mirror now showed her normal reflection. Just a harmless old woman. My mouth felt dry. I dropped the coffee. "Sorry about that." "Oh dear," she said sympathetically. "How clumsy. But accidents happen." Ryan looked over from the gas pump. "You all right, Sergeant?" "Yeah," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just slipped." I left the spilled coffee where it was and walked over to where Jacob had stopped near the edge of the parking lot. He was standing just outside the bright parking lot lights, looking tense. "Jacob?" I said quietly as I approached. "Can we talk?" He nodded, his eyes constantly looking around. "Something's wrong with her," he said before I could speak. "With Martha." The fact that he'd reached the same conclusion made my stomach drop. "What have you seen?" Jacob hesitated, like he was afraid saying it aloud would make him sound crazy. "Her shadow, it doesn't move right. Back at the rest stop, while you were talking to her, I watched her shadow on the ground. It stretched out way too long, all the way across the parking lot." His voice got even quieter. "And it was moving when she wasn't." I looked back at the Humvee where Martha sat waiting. From here, everything about her looked normal. "I just saw something in the side mirror," I told him. When I looked at Martha's reflection, she wasn't human. Yellow eyes, teeth like needles. I shook my head. But when I turned around to look at her directly, she was normal. Jacob wasn't surprised. He just nodded like I'd confirmed something he already suspected. "What the hell is going on?" I asked, more to myself than to him. "No idea," Jacob replied, "but I know what I saw, and now you've seen something too." I made a decision. We need to keep an eye on her. For the rest of the drive to Elko, we take shifts staying awake. Even if Ryan is driving, one of us is awake and watching at all times. "Agreed," Jacob said. "What about Sean? Has he noticed anything off?" He mentioned the compass going crazy, but nothing about Martha specifically. I nodded. "Let's keep it between us for now. I don't want to spook everyone if we don't have to. We still have a mission to complete." We rejoined the others. I went back inside to replace the spilled coffee, making sure not to look in any mirrors on my way back to the vehicle. 10 minutes later, we were back on the road. Ryan took over driving, with Jacob and Sean following in the second Humvee. I sat in the passenger seat but kept turning to check on Martha in the back. She started making a weird noise about an hour after we left Winnemucca. The sound wasn't like any song I'd heard before. It didn't really have a melody, just random sounds that almost made sense but then went in strange directions. It wasn't bad to listen to, but it made me feel really sad for some reason. As she made those sounds, pictures flashed through my mind. A young woman standing alone in a field. An empty house with strange windows. A child lost in the desert. I knew these weren't my memories, but they felt weirdly personal, like someone had put them straight into my brain. "You look troubled, Sergeant," Martha said, pausing her humming. I realized I'd been staring at her. "Just tired, ma'am." "The road takes its toll," she said with a knowing smile, "but we're getting closer now." I turned back to look at the road ahead, watching the highway show up in the headlights. That's when I first noticed the landscape changing. A tall rock stood out against the night sky to our right, a tower of rock at least 50 feet high. I blinked, and it was gone. Instead, there was just a small hill with some bushes. "Did you see that?" I asked Ryan, pointing to where the formation had been. "See what?" Ryan kept his eyes on the road. I shook my head. "Nothing. Thought I saw something." It happened again 20 minutes later. The moon had been right above us, but suddenly it was way lower in the sky, like hours went by in a split second. The stars kept changing when I wasn't looking right at them. Constellations I knew well showed up and vanished. The highway started changing too. I'd blink, and the road ahead would be totally different. Suddenly there'd be a curve instead of a straight road, or a hill where it had been flat before. Even the signs were weird. We'd pass a mile marker saying 117, and then right after we'd see marker 142, like we jumped 25 miles in seconds. I kept checking the odometer, trying to figure out how far we'd gone. Nothing made sense. Sometimes we'd drive for like 10 minutes and somehow cover 40 miles. Other times we'd drive for what felt like a whole hour, and the numbers on the odometer barely moved. "Ryan," I said quietly, "does the road look right to you?" He scowled slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, does it match the route we mapped out? The landmarks, the mile markers?" Ryan looked at the map on his lap, then back at the road. "Seems right to me. We should reach Elko around 4 a.m. at this rate." I couldn't tell if he really didn't notice the changes or if he was choosing to ignore them, the way he'd acted about the radio and temperature changes earlier. Maybe this was his way of dealing, pretending everything was normal. Martha's buzzing grew louder, though she wasn't actually getting louder. It was like the sound was both in and outside the car, surrounding us like a bubble of noise. The sadness it brought up got deeper. I started thinking about Fallujah, about the night raid that went wrong, of the civilian I'd killed by mistake in the darkness. A man who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'd covered it up, reported that we'd taken fire when we hadn't. No one knew the truth, no one except me. Why was I thinking about this now? I felt a hand on my shoulder. Martha had leaned forward from the back seat, her cool fingers resting lightly on my uniform. "Your secret is safe with me, Sergeant Wilson," she whispered. A burning feeling spread from her touch, so strong I almost cried out. It wasn't really painful, more like the feeling of ice against bare skin, so cold it feels hot. I pulled away, turning to face her. "What did you say?" Martha smiled, her eyes catching the dashboard lights. For a split second, they looked yellow again. "I said we must be getting close now," she replied, her voice normal and pleasant. She settled back into her seat, resuming her humming. Ryan shot me a concerned look, but said nothing. My shoulder still burned where she had touched me, the heat going right through my uniform. I tried to roll my shoulder to get rid of the feeling, but it wouldn't go away. Outside, the landscape kept changing in ways that seemed impossible. A small hill showed up in the distance against the night sky. As we got closer, it changed into what looked like huge rocks, then some dead trees. Then it disappeared completely. I kept watching Martha in the rearview mirror, looking for any hint of that creature I saw at the gas station. She still looked human, but now I could spot little things that were off. Her movements were too smooth, she didn't blink like normal people, and she stayed way too still for too long. The buzzing sound kept going, mixing with my thoughts and bringing strange pictures. Very old places I'd never been to. People wearing old-fashioned clothes in front of the house Martha talked about in Elko, and yellow eyes looking out from the dark. The burning on my shoulder wasn't getting better. If anything, it hurt more as time went on. I tried rubbing it, moving around, even pressing my cold coffee cup on it, but nothing worked. The whole time, Martha watched me from the back seat with this weird smile, like she knew something I didn't, like she wasn't in any rush, like she'd been through this whole thing before. We were still hours away from Elko, but I just knew that whatever Martha was, whatever she was up to, we were already in too deep to back out now. Light was just starting to show in the sky as we drove past the "Welcome to Elko" sign. The small Nevada city looked like any other at this hour, a few lit windows in houses and early shift workers heading to their jobs. Nothing about it seemed strange, which somehow made our trip feel even weirder. "Take the next right," Martha said from the back seat, her first words in over an hour. "Juniper Street is just ahead." Ryan had been driving for about 2 hours and followed her directions. Jacob and Sean stayed right behind us in the second Humvee, their headlights shining on the road ahead. The main streets of Elko turned into residential areas, then older neighborhoods with homes built in the early part of the century. When we turned onto Juniper Street, the houses sat farther apart on bigger, overgrown lots. "There," Martha said, pointing to a house at the far end of the street. 637 Juniper Street, my home. Ryan slowed the vehicle as we approached. The house stood apart from its neighbors, set back from the road behind what had once been a neat yard and garden. Now it was a tangle of weeds and trees that had grown on their own, unchecked for what looked like decades. The structure itself was a Victorian-style home, 2 stories with a small turret on one side and a wraparound porch. But any charm it might have had was long gone. Paint peeled from the siding in large flakes. Several windows were boarded over with weathered plywood. The porch sagged in the middle like it might collapse under any significant weight. Ryan pulled to a stop at the curb and checked the address on his phone to make sure we had the right place. "This can't be right," he said, looking from the paperwork to the dilapidated structure. "No one lives here." Martha's reflection in the rearview mirror showed only a pleasant smile. "This is my home," she repeated firmly. I reached for the radio to contact command, needing confirmation that we were really supposed to leave this elderly woman at what was clearly an abandoned house. "Sierra Actual, this is QRF team. We've reached the drop point, but the location appears uninhabitable. Request instructions, Over. The radio crackled, and a voice came through surprisingly clear compared to our earlier communication issues. QRF team, complete your mission as instructed. Acknowledge, over. I paused, looking at the house again. Sierra Actual, the structure appears abandoned. Requesting permission to transport the subject to a local hospital or shelter instead. Over. Negative QRF team, complete the delivery exactly as requested. That is an order. Over and out. The response was final and left no room to argue. I put down the radio and turned to Ryan. We have our orders. He nodded, though his expression showed the same doubt I felt. We got out of the vehicle and I walked around to help Martha. The second Humvee pulled up behind us and Jacob and Sean stepped out, looking up at the house with obvious confusion. As we gathered at the curb, I noticed movement in neighboring houses. Curtains moved in windows. A door opened and closed quickly. The whole street seemed to be watching us, though no one approached. Martha stood beside me, her faded blue dress hanging perfectly still while the morning breeze ruffled my uniform. She looked up at the house with a smile like she was seeing a place she loved, not a rundown building. Let me speak with the neighbors, I told Ryan. Stay with her. An old man showed up on the porch of the house across the street. He looked about 80, wearing pajama pants and a cardigan even though it was early morning. He stared at us, looking curious and worried. I crossed the street, trying to look friendly. Good morning, sir. I'm Sergeant Wilson, U.S. Army. We're here on official business. The man's eyes darted to Martha and then back to me. His face turned really pale. What's the Army want with that old place? He asked, voice shaking slightly. We were instructed to transport this woman to this address, I explained, gesturing toward Martha. She claims it's her home. Do you know who lives there? The man gripped the porch railing. Nobody's lived there since the Johnson family in the 60s. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Martha Johnson went missing in 63. Search parties looked for weeks. I shivered as the words hit me. Missing since 1963, I repeated, remembering Martha's words in the field. Since 1963. That's right. Her husband kept up the place for years, hoping she'd come back. After he passed, it just sat empty. The family tried to sell it, but he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. But what? Nobody would buy it. Folks around here say it's not right. Strange noises. Lights when there shouldn't be any. You know how people talk. I thanked him and walked back to my team, trying to keep my expression neutral. Jacob caught my eye as I approached, his face asking a silent question. I gave a small shake of my head, not now. When I reached them, Martha was already walking toward the house, moving with surprising steadiness across the uneven ground of the front yard. We followed behind her, our boots stepping through the tall grass. Martha stopped at the foot of the porch steps. The wood looked rotted and unsafe. Ma'am, I started to say, I don't think those steps will. She turned to look at me, and for a split second, her eyes caught the early morning light with that unnatural yellow reflection. Then she smiled and climbed the steps like they were brand new, the wood not even creaking under her. We followed more carefully, testing each step before putting our weight on it. Jacob stayed close to Martha while Ryan, Sean, and I spread out, keeping a perimeter out of habit, rather than any real threat. Martha reached into her dress pocket and pulled out an old brass key. The door looked warped in its frame, the wood split and worn down from years in the weather. Any working lock would have stopped working years ago. Yet Martha held the key up to put it in the lock. Before the key touched it, the door swung inward by itself, opening without a sound on what should have been rusted hinges. Ryan let out a soft curse behind me. I kept my eyes on Martha as she stood in the doorway, her shape outlined against the darkness inside. She turned to face us, and her expression had changed. The grandmotherly warmth was gone, replaced by something very old and knowing. When she spoke, her voice had changed, deeper, with a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Thank you for bringing me home," she said. "You should leave now." Those words sounded more serious than just telling us to leave. They sounded like a warning. I took a step back, suddenly feeling like something was very wrong, worse than anything I'd felt in combat before. "Everyone back to the vehicles," I said firmly. Ryan and Sean didn't need to be told twice. They were already heading down the steps. Jacob hesitated, looking between Martha and me. "Wilson," he said, a question in his tone. "Go," I told him. "I'm right behind you." As Jacob turned to leave, Martha called out to me, "Thomas." Hearing my first name made me freeze. I turned back to face her. Then she was right next to me. Not in the doorway where she'd been a second before, but standing so close I could feel that weird chill coming off her body. "I see what you did in Fallujah," she whispered, her breath like winter against my ear. "I know what you're hiding." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. That night in Fallujah, the civilian, the cover-up, no one knew about that. I'd never told anyone. Not my commanding officers, not my teammates, not even in my most private thoughts. Martha smiled, her teeth too white and too numerous in her elderly face. "Your secrets are safe with me, Thomas. For now." I backed away, nearly stumbling down the porch steps in my haste to put distance between us. Martha remained in the doorway, watching with that knowing smile as I rejoined my team at the vehicles. "What did she say to you?" Jacob asked as I approached. I shook my head, couldn't come up with anything to say that made sense. How could I explain that this woman, this thing, knew about something I'd done half a world away, something no one else could possibly know? As we climbed into our vehicles, I looked back at the house. Martha still stood in the doorway, wearing her blue outfit against the darkness inside. As I watched, she stepped back into the dark, and the door swung shut by itself. The drive back to Fort Carson felt longer than the trip to Elko. No one talked as we left the city limits. The Nevada desert was empty under the morning sun. The radio was quiet. Sean sat stiff in the passenger seat of my Humvee, looking straight ahead with his jaw clenched tight. Ryan drove, his face blank, focusing on the road. In the mirror, I could see the second Humvee following us, with Jacob driving. My shoulder still burned where Martha had touched me. I moved it now and then, trying to feel better, but the pain stayed, a reminder of what happened. Her words stuck with me. "I see what you did in Fallujah. I know what you're hiding." No one knew about that night. Not my commanding officers, not my team. I'd written up the report calling the civilian an enemy combatant, saying we'd taken fire when we hadn't. The man had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time, coming out of a doorway when I was on edge, my finger too quick on the trigger. The official record showed a clean kill, but I knew the truth. And now, somehow, so did Martha. We only stopped when we needed fuel or to switch drivers. We only talked about basic stuff. How far to the next gas station, whose turn it was to drive, which way would get us back fastest. No one mentioned Martha or the house or anything we'd seen over the last 48 hours. By the time we got to Fort Carson, the sun was setting on the second day. We parked the Humvees at the motor pool, signed in our weapons, and filled out the paperwork. Captain Lewis was waiting for us, clipboard in hand, looking exactly like he did when he'd briefed us before the mission, as if nothing weird had happened. "Mission completed as ordered, sir," I reported, keeping my voice steady. Lewis nodded. "Good work, Sergeant. Get your men some rest. Debriefing tomorrow at 0900. That was it. No questions about our unusual passenger, no curiosity about the abandoned house. Just a standard acknowledgement of a completed mission. We headed to the barracks in silence. At the door to our shared quarters, Sean finally spoke. "I'm putting in for a transfer," he said, eyes fixed on some distant point. "First thing tomorrow morning." I nodded. What else could I say? I couldn't blame him. Jacob stood in the doorway, duffel bag in hand. "I called my CO while you were filling out the vehicle return forms. Got emergency leave approved. My brother's coming to pick me up in an hour." "You don't have to lie about why you're going," I said quietly. Jacob met my eyes for the first time since Elko. "I'm not." I told him I needed to get away from something I saw. He didn't ask questions. He lifted his bag. "Not sure when I'll be back." After Jacob left, Ryan started unpacking his gear carefully, putting everything in its usual place, like this was all routine. "You want to talk about what happened?" I asked him. Ryan looked up from what he was doing, his face empty. "Nothing happened. We transported a civilian to where she wanted to go. Mission complete." He went back to unpacking, his shoulders tense in a way that said he was done talking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just laid in my bunk looking at the ceiling fan going around. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw Martha's face, sometimes as the nice old lady, sometimes as that thing I saw in the gas station mirror with those pointy teeth and yellow eyes. I couldn't stop thinking about how she knew about Fallujah. Not just that something happened there. Tons of soldiers had stories from Fallujah, but the exact thing I'd never told anyone about. All the details of what I felt guilty and ashamed about. After 2 nights without sleep, I got a message to go to Building 7, Room 203 at 2 p.m. The sender just said, "Command." I got there 5 minutes early, wearing my clean uniform and shiny boots. The hallway was quiet, with most offices empty. Room 203 didn't have a name on it, just the number on a small sign next to the door. I knocked. "Enter," called a voice from inside. The office had a desk, 2 chairs, and nothing else. No computer, no phone, no files on the desk. Just a single manila folder. Behind the desk sat a man I'd never seen before on base. He wore a colonel's rank, his uniform perfect, his gray hair cut regulation short. His face was weathered, with deep lines around his mouth and eyes, but his eyes were sharp, sizing me up. "Sergeant Thomas Wilson," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir." I stood at attention. "At ease, Sergeant. Take a seat." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I'm Colonel Robert Hayes." I sat, back straight, hands on my knees. Hayes studied me for a moment before speaking again. "Your mission report was incomplete," he said without introduction. "Sir, I reported everything according to protocol." Hayes didn't respond immediately. Instead, he opened the folder on his desk and removed several photographs, laying them out one by one. "These were taken yesterday," he said. I leaned forward to look. The photos showed the Victorian house in Elko, the same house where we'd left Martha. But instead of the rundown structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch, the house in the photos looked perfect. Fresh white paint shined in the sunlight. The porch stood straight and strong. The yard, which had been full of weeds before, now had neat green grass and trim bushes. It looked like a completely different house, or like the same house from 60 years ago before it got old and neglected. "That's not possible," I said. "The house was falling apart 2 days ago." Hayes laid out more photos. These showed the inside of the house. Empty rooms with hardwood floors and freshly painted walls. But covering those walls were weird symbols and shapes I'd never seen before, drawn in what looked like dark red-brown liquid. "Is that—" I couldn't finish the question. "Blood?" Hayes supplied. "Yes, though not human, according to our tests." My stomach felt sick. The patterns were all over the walls with curves and sharp lines. Some looked like weird faces or body parts, while others were just strange designs I couldn't stare at for long without getting dizzy. "What is this?" I asked. "Who is she?" Hayes gathered the photos back into the folder. "What you transported wasn't human, Sergeant Wilson. The Navajo have a name for such entities, skinwalkers, beings that can take human form. The yellow eyes in the gas station mirror, the way Martha's reflection sometimes vanished, her impossible lightness when I helped her into the Humvee. The military has been tracking this particular entity since it first appeared in that field in 1963, Hayes continued, though our records of similar phenomena go back much further. You knew what we were transporting? My voice came out harder than I intended. You sent us in blind? Hayes kept a straight face. Would you have believed me if I'd told you the truth during your briefing? Would your team have completed the mission? I thought about that for a moment. Would we have? Or would we have assumed the colonel was crazy? Or that this was some kind of psychological training exercise? Every 60 years, this entity needs to return to its dwelling place, Hayes said. We don't know why, and we don't know what it does there. What we do know is that if it walks the distance itself, it leaves destruction in its wake. What kind of destruction? In 1843, before the military became involved, it walked from approximately the same location where you picked it up to that house in Elko. 3 settlements along its path were found completely empty of human life afterward. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just empty buildings with these same markings on the walls. I remembered how weird it felt when time and space got all mixed up during our drive with Martha, the scenery changing, distances feeling too short or too long. So you provide transportation, I said, beginning to understand, to minimize casualties. Hayes nodded once. Correct. The entity seems to accept this arrangement. It waits in the field for its escorts, allows itself to be transported, and then does whatever it does at its destination. And then what? It just disappears for another 60 years? That appears to be the pattern, yes. Though it doesn't always take the same form. Sometimes male, sometimes female, different ages, but always at the same starting location, always needing to reach the same destination. I thought about Martha's words to me in the house, the way she knew my secret from Fallujah. It knows things, I said. Things it shouldn't be able to know. Hayes' face changed a bit, the first real reaction I'd seen from him. Yes, it seems to have access to memories, secrets. Did it speak to you personally, Sergeant? I paused. Something held me back from sharing what Martha had said about Fallujah. It knew my first name, I finally answered. None of us had told her our first names. Hayes looked at me for a moment, like he was wondering if he should ask more. Then he gave a small nod. The entity sometimes marks those who transport it, he said. Those it takes a particular interest in. My shoulder started burning more when he said that, like it was responding to his words. I tried not to rub it. Your team members have already begun to separate, Hayes observed. This is not unusual. Those who encounter the entity tend to deal with the experience in different ways. Sean's transferring. Jacob took leave. Ryan's pretending nothing happened. And you, Sergeant Wilson, how are you dealing with it? I looked at the photos again, at the blood symbols covering the walls of the restored house. I'm trying to understand it. Hayes closed the folder. Some things may not be meant for human understanding. Your mission is complete. The entity is where it needs to be. That's what matters. I stood up, feeling like the meeting was over, but I had another question I really wanted to ask. Sir, why was our team chosen for this mission? Hayes looked at me for a long moment. Report to this office again tomorrow, same time. There's more you should know, but that's enough for today. I saluted and turned to leave. Sergeant? Hayes called as I reached the door. I looked back. The burn where it touched you, it will fade in time. I jerked my hand away from my shoulder, not even realizing I'd been rubbing it. How did you? Tomorrow, Sergeant Wilson, Hayes said, already opening another folder on his previously empty desk. 1400 hours. I walked back to the barracks, my mind racing with what I'd learned. The markings on the wall, the entity that wasn't human, the military's long-standing arrangement to transport it every 60 years. Sean was gone when I returned, his bunk stripped bare, his locker empty. Ryan sat on his own bunk, cleaning his sidearm carefully. "Where have you been?" he asked without looking up. "Meeting with a colonel about the mission." Ryan's hands stopped for a second, then went back to work. "What mission?" I looked at him, really looked at him. His face was calm, focused on what he was doing, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. His knuckles were white where he held the cleaning cloth. "Ryan," I said carefully, "you don't have to pretend it didn't happen." He finally looked at me. "I'm not pretending anything. We transported a civilian. End of story." But I could tell he was scared. He needed to deny what happened because accepting it would mess up everything he thought he knew about the world. "Okay," I said, backing off. End of story. That night, I dreamed of Martha standing in the doorway of the Victorian house, her eyes shining yellow in the darkness. In the dream, she waved me over, her smile showing too many needle-sharp teeth. "I'll see you again, Thomas," she said, her voice echoing as if coming from very far away. In exactly 60 years. I woke up gasping, my shoulder burning like someone had pressed a hot coal against my skin. I got to Building 7 at 2 p.m. the next day, still thinking about my earlier meeting with Colonel Hayes. The hallway was quiet, with most doors shut. I knocked on room 203 and heard a short "enter" from inside. Hayes was behind the desk like before, but now there were old folders with red security stamps on top. His face didn't show any emotion as he pointed to the chair across from him. "Sergeant Wilson," he said. "Good. Take a seat." I sat down, noticing my shoulder had started burning again the moment I entered the room. The pain wasn't as sharp as before, more like an ache that throbbed with every beat. I fought the urge to touch it. "You asked why your team was chosen for this mission," Hayes said without preamble. "The answer is more complicated than you might expect." He opened one of the folders and turned it toward me. Inside was a black and white photograph dated 1903. It showed 4 men in old military uniforms standing in front of what looked like a field hospital tent. Between them stood a young woman in a long white dress. Her face was plain, nothing special except for her eyes, which reflected the camera flash with an unusually bright shine. 1903 was the first documented military interaction with the entity, Hayes explained. Before that, it simply walked to its destination, leaving problems in its wake. I looked closer at the photo. The young woman was completely still compared to the slight blur of movement in the soldiers around her. One man had his hand on her shoulder, his face partly turned away from the camera like he couldn't bear to look at her. Hayes pushed another folder toward me. This one had a photo from 1963. 4 soldiers in Vietnam-era uniforms stood around a middle-aged guy in regular clothes. The man was smiling and looked comfortable, but his eyes caught the light in that same weird way. "Different appearance, same entity," Hayes said. "We track it by the pattern of its movements and the effect it has on those who transport it." I went through more photos, 1843, 1783, 1723, each showing it in different human forms, always with those reflecting eyes when caught on camera. The oldest pictures were falling apart, but I could clearly see the pattern. "We don't know what it is or where it comes from," Hayes admitted, his clinical tone slipping just slightly to reveal genuine frustration. "But we know containing it, or rather managing its transportation, saves lives." He pulled out another folder, older than the rest, the edges crumbling with age. Inside were handwritten accounts and crude sketches. In 1843, before the military's involvement, the entity walked from Nevada to its dwelling place, Hayes said. 3 settlements along its path were found completely empty of human life afterward. The sketches showed abandoned buildings, tables with meals half-eaten, a schoolhouse with lessons still written on the board. But no people, not a single body. Empty, I repeated, thinking about the implications. Not destroyed, not with bodies, just empty. Exactly. No signs of violence, no blood, just empty buildings with those same markings on the walls that you saw in the photos yesterday. I remembered the blood symbols from Hayes's photographs of the restored Victorian house. What happened to the people? Hayes closed the folder. We don't know. They were never found. I tried to imagine it. Entire towns of people simply gone, vanished without a trace. The image made my skin crawl. So every 60 years you send a team to pick up this thing and drive it where it wants to go. I leaned forward. Why weren't we briefed properly? We went in completely blind. Hayes looked at me with those sharp eyes that seemed to size me up. Would you have believed me? Would you have completed the mission? There was silence between us. I thought about Martha's weightless body when I helped her into the Humvee. Her disappearing reflection in the mirror. The impossible changes in the landscape during our drive. If someone had told me beforehand what we would experience, I would have thought they were insane. No, I finally admitted. I wouldn't have believed it. Hayes nodded, as if my answer confirmed something he already knew. That's why we use the same approach every time. A simple extraction mission, minimal details. The teams always come back changed, but the entity reaches its destination without incident. Changed how? The burning in my shoulder intensified. The entity seems to take an interest in certain individuals, Hayes said carefully. Those who transport it sometimes report strange phenomena afterward, especially those who hear their secrets whispered back to them. Martha's words played over and over in my head. I see what you did in Fallujah. I know what you're hiding. Hayes watched me closely. Did it speak to you personally, Sergeant? Tell you something no one else could know? I held his gaze but kept silent. Something told me that sharing Martha's knowledge of Fallujah would be dangerous, not because Hayes would report me, but because saying it aloud would somehow make the connection between me and Martha stronger. After a moment, Hayes continued without pressing further. Those who are marked often report sensory anomalies, seeing things that shouldn't be there, objects moving, dreams that feel more real than waking life. That scared me. Marked? Hayes glanced at my shoulder, the exact spot where Martha had touched me and left that burning sensation. The entity leaves a kind of impression on some people. We don't fully understand it. Is it permanent? Usually not. The effects typically fade within a few months. Hayes paused. Usually. That single word, usually, sat between us with a whole lot left unsaid. And my team? I asked. Sean, Jacob, Ryan? They each had different levels of contact with the entity. Their reactions are not unusual. Some deny, some run, some try to understand. Hayes gathered the folders. Your interest in understanding puts you in the minority, Sergeant Wilson. So what happens now? What am I supposed to do with this information? Nothing. Your mission is complete. The entity is where it needs to be. In all likelihood, it will remain dormant until the next cycle begins. Hayes stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. If you experience any unusual phenomena, report it directly to me. Otherwise, resume your normal duties. I stood, still trying to understand everything I'd learned. Sir, you mentioned yesterday that there was a reason my team was selected. You haven't explained that yet. Something changed in Hayes's face. He seemed a bit softer around the eyes. No, I haven't. That's for tomorrow's meeting, Sergeant. 1400 hours. I saluted and left the office, my head full of pictures of the entity throughout history, always with those reflecting eyes, always moving between the same 2 points across Nevada every 60 years. The barracks were quiet when I got back. Ryan was gone. Probably at the range or the gym, anywhere he could keep busy and not think about Martha. Sean's bunk was still empty and Jacob was still on leave. The room felt bigger, emptier without them. I sat down on my bunk, trying to make sense of everything Hayes had told me. The burning in my shoulder was now just a dull ache, noticeable but manageable. Then I saw something on my pillow. A small, rounded stone about the size of a quarter. It was dark gray with faint lines of red, smooth like it had been polished by water, but very old. I was sure it hadn't been there when I left for my meeting with Hayes. I picked it up carefully. The moment my fingers touched it, the room around me disappeared. I stood in a huge desert under a strange sky filled with stars I didn't recognize. Ahead of me walked a tall, skinny figure with paper-white skin pulled too tight over a long frame. It moved weirdly across the sand, leaving no footprints. As if it knew I was there, it turned. Yellow eyes with vertical pupils looked right at me. The face wasn't right. Features too sharp, mouth too wide and filled with tiny pointed teeth. But I knew right away it was Martha's true form, the creature I had seen in the gas station mirror. Then suddenly I was back in the barracks, sitting on my bunk, breathing hard. The stone slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. When it landed, it broke into fine gray dust that spread across the concrete. I stared at the dust. Couldn't move. Couldn't make sense of what I'd just seen. Was that Martha thousands of years ago? Or was it something that hadn't happened yet? The dust looked exactly like the kind that sometimes showed up on my bunk in the morning, the dust I'd been wiping away without thinking about where it came from. That night, I lay in bed looking at the ceiling fan, watching it turn slowly and trying not to think about what had happened. Sleep didn't come easily, but when it did, I dreamed. In the dream, I stood in a dark room with no doors or windows. From every shadow, yellow eyes watched me. Not just one pair, but dozens, hundreds, all with the same vertical pupils, all watching me with the same hungry look. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I could only stand still as the eyes came closer, the shadows moving toward me from every direction. I woke up covered in sweat, the sheets all twisted around my legs. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the emergency exit sign in the hallway showing under the door. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming, because in the corner of the room, in the darkest part, I saw a pair of yellow eyes watching me. I blinked, and they were gone. 1 month after dropping Martha off at the Victorian house, I asked for leave to visit Elko. The form sat on my desk for 3 days before I finally turned it in. I wasn't sure if I really wanted to go back there. When I handed it to my commanding officer, I expected questions. Why Elko? What was I doing there? Instead, he signed it without even looking up, almost too quickly. Someone must have told him I'd ask. My shoulder hurt less now, though it still bothered me at night. Ryan had asked for a transfer to Fort Bragg 2 weeks after our final meeting with Hayes. Jacob never came back from his emergency leave and got an honorable discharge instead. Sean was just gone. No transfer papers, no discharge. Just an empty bunk and a note marking him as reassigned to a classified unit. I packed light. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and my notes about everything Hayes told me. The drive would take about 10 hours from Fort Carson, following the same route we'd taken with Martha. I left before dawn when the highways were empty except for trucks and a few cars. The trip was different this time. No radio stations changing by themselves, no weird temperature changes, no strange landscapes popping up and disappearing. Just normal highway and towns right where they should be. I got to Winnemucca around noon and stopped at the same truck stop where I'd seen Martha's true form in the mirror. I filled my tank, got a sandwich, and stood looking at the side of the building for a while, half expecting to see something weird in the glass. Nothing happened. just my tired face looking back at me. The drive felt shorter and more normal this time. 4 hours later, I passed the Welcome to Elko sign and drove through the quiet streets until I reached Juniper. I parked across from 637 Juniper Street and sat in my car, just looking. The Victorian house looked exactly like it did when we first brought Martha. Paint peeling off old boards, windows boarded up or broken, the porch sinking in the middle. The yard was overgrown again. No sign of the White House from Hayes' photographs. Were those photos even real? Or did Hayes show them to me for some other reason? I got out of my car and stood on the sidewalk checking out the house. The front steps where Martha had walked up so easily now looked even more rotten. The door was slightly open, but it was dark inside. I thought about crossing the street and going up those steps to look inside, but something stopped me. I didn't feel ready for whatever was in there. "Are you looking for someone?" I turned to find an older woman watching me from the next yard over. She had gardening gloves on and was holding pruning shears in one hand and a basket of cut roses in the other. Her face had lots of wrinkles, but she looked at me with alert, curious eyes. She'd been working in the garden beside the house next door, partly hidden by a tall hedge. "I'm sorry," I said. I knew someone who used to live here." She tilted her head, looking at me more carefully. "Military, aren't you?" "Even without the uniform, I can tell. My Harold was Army too, back in Korea." "Yes, ma'am. I'm on leave." She nodded, setting down her basket. "I'm Alice Winters. Been living next door since 1956. She pointed toward the Victorian house. "Nobody's lived there for decades, though. Not since the Johnsons." I took a step closer. "Actually, that's who I'm interested in. The Johnsons. Martha Johnson specifically." Something flashed across Alice's face. Surprise, perhaps, or suspicion. "How would you know Martha? She disappeared long before you were born." "Family connection," I lied, the words coming easily. "My grandfather mentioned the Johnsons. I was passing through and thought I'd see the house." Alice pulled off her gardening gloves. "Well, that's the first time anyone's asked about Martha in years. Would you like some coffee? I've got a fresh pot on, and it's about time for my afternoon break anyway." 10 minutes later, I sat at Alice's kitchen table, a steaming mug in front of me. Her house was tidy but crowded with decades of collected items, photographs covering the walls, knickknacks on every surface, furniture that looked worn but comfortable. It smelled of potpourri and fresh-baked cookies, which she'd insisted I try. "So," she said, settling into the chair across from me with a slight wince that spoke of arthritis. "What's your name, young man?" "Thomas Wilson. And you said your grandfather knew the Johnsons?" I nodded, sticking to my story. "He mentioned them a few times. I'm trying to piece together some family history." Alice looked at me over her coffee cup, her eyes a bit narrow. "Well, I knew Martha and William pretty well. We were neighbors for 7 years before she disappeared. William just wasn't the same after that." "What happened to her?" I asked, though Hayes had already told me the basics. Alice got up with a small grunt and went to a cluttered desk in the corner of the kitchen. She rummaged through a drawer and came back with a small photo album and a yellowed newspaper clipping. "May 17th, 1963, she said, sliding the clipping toward me. "Martha went into town for groceries and never came home. William reported her missing when she hadn't returned by nightfall." The headline read, "Local woman missing, foul play suspected." Below it was a grainy photograph of Martha Johnson, a pleasant-looking woman in her 40s, her hair styled in the fashion of the early 60s, smiling at the camera. "They searched for weeks," Alice continued. "Police, volunteers, even brought in dogs from Reno. Nothing. Her car was found at the grocery store with the shopping still in it. No signs of struggle, no witnesses. She just vanished." "What did people think happened?" I asked, studying the newspaper photo. "Oh, there were theories. Some thought she'd run off with another man, though anyone who knew Martha knew that was nonsense. She adored William. Others thought maybe she'd been kidnapped or had an accident somewhere remote. The most persistent rumor was that she'd been murdered, body hidden so well it would never be found. Alice shook her head. Poor William. He never gave up hoping she'd come back. He stayed in the house until the day he died in 1978. 15 years he waited for her, keeping that house exactly as it was the day she disappeared. After he passed, their daughter tried to sell it, but Alice trailed off. But what? I prompted. Alice sipped her coffee. No one would buy it. There were stories about the house, strange noises, lights when no one was there. One family actually moved in for a week before leaving suddenly in the middle of the night, would never say what happened. She waved a hand dismissively. Small town gossip, probably. Eventually, the daughter just stopped trying to sell it. It's been sitting empty ever since. I thought about what Hayes had shown me. The photos of the restored house with blood symbols on the walls. Has anything strange happened there recently? In the last month, maybe? Alice's hand paused halfway to her mouth. She set her cup down slowly. Funny you should ask that. About 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Galloway across the street called the police about lights in the house. Said she saw all the windows lit up around midnight, then they went dark again by morning. Did the police investigate? They did. Broke in through the back door since the front was locked tight. Found nothing except... She hesitated. Except what? Well, the officer who went in, Danny Reeves, I've known him since he was in diapers. He said they found some weird drawings on the walls, like symbols or something, drawn in what looked like rust or old blood. They took samples, but I never heard what came of it. The kitchen was warm, but I still felt uneasy. Did Officer Reeves say anything else about what he saw? Alice looked troubled. He said the inside of the house was clean, not dusty or falling apart like you'd expect after sitting empty for decades, like someone had been maintaining it. She shook her head. But when I asked if I could see for myself, he said no, it was too dangerous. The floor might collapse, the structure was unsound. By the next day, he was saying he didn't remember finding anything unusual at all. We sat in silence for a moment. I finished my coffee while Alice flipped open the photo album. I kept these, she said. Martha was my friend. This is her and William in front of the house when it was new to them. The photograph showed a middle-aged couple standing proudly on the porch of the Victorian. The house looked really nice back then. Fresh paint, windows that weren't broken, flowers in window boxes. William Johnson had his arm around Martha's shoulders, both of them smiling big. They were so happy, Alice murmured. Such a shame what happened. Martha was the kindest person you'd ever meet. Always bringing soup when someone was sick, volunteering at the church. She didn't deserve whatever happened to her. She turned the page, revealing more photographs. Martha at a garden party. Martha and William at what looked like a town festival. Then Alice flipped to a close-up picture of Martha's face. This was taken about a month before she disappeared, Alice said. William had it framed on his bedside table afterward. I leaned forward to look more closely and felt the blood drain from my face. Martha Johnson, the real Martha Johnson, stared back at me from the photograph. Her pleasant smile and kind face were familiar enough after seeing the newspaper clipping, but what freaked me out were her eyes. Captured in the flash of the camera, they reflected yellow, exactly like the creature's eyes I had seen in the gas station mirror. Is something wrong? Alice asked, noticing my reaction. I tried to keep my voice steady. No, Before I came, I was curious if Martha had any special features. Something I might recognize from family stories. Alice smiled. Funny you should ask. Martha had these unusual eyes that sometimes caught the light in a weird way. In some photos, they'd shine like a cat's. William used to joke about it, said she must have a wild animal in her family tree somewhere. She tapped the photo. You can see it in this one. Did she ever act strangely? Do or say things that seemed out of character? Alice looked confused by the question. Not that I remember. She was always even-tempered, reliable, though. She paused, thinking hard. There was one thing. Sometimes she'd know things she shouldn't have known. Like when Judith Miller from church was pregnant before Judith told anyone. Or the time she warned Frank Patterson not to take his usual fishing spot because of a mudslide. And sure enough, the next day that whole bank fell into the river. I got goosebumps. Did people think that was weird? Small towns, you know how it is. People just said she was intuitive, had good instincts. Alice closed the photo album. Why do you ask? Just curious, I said, trying to sound casual. My grandfather mentioned she was special somehow. Alice nodded slowly. I suppose she was, in her way. The Johnsons had been in this area for generations, you know. Martha's great-grandfather was one of the original settlers. Some of the old-timers used to say the Johnsons had a special bond with this land, stronger than most folks. I thanked Alice for the coffee and the info, and headed out before she could see I was rattled. At the door, she put the newspaper clipping in my hand. Take it, she said. I've kept it all these years, but maybe it belongs with someone who's still looking for answers about Martha. I sat in my car for a long time afterward, staring at the abandoned house across the street. The sun was setting. I kept thinking about the yellow reflection in Martha Johnson's eyes in that photograph. The same reflection I'd seen in the thing's eyes. The same yellow eyes that now sometimes looked back at me from mirrors or watched me from shadows. Was the Martha we transported the same person who had disappeared in 1963? Had she somehow changed over those 60 years into the creature I saw in the gas station mirror? Or had the thing taken Martha's form, maybe after causing her disappearance? I remembered what Hayes had said about the thing taking different forms throughout history. Male, female, different ages, but always making the same journey every 60 years. What if it didn't just take random forms, but picked people who already had some connection to it? People whose eyes already showed yellow in photographs? The front door of the old house was slightly open, with a bit of darkness visible beyond. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in that darkness, something moving just out of sight. A flash of yellow there and gone too quickly to be sure. I started my car and pulled away from the curb, my hands shaky on the wheel. I had come looking for answers, but had only found deeper questions. My shoulder started hurting as I drove past the city limits sign, reminding me that whatever connection existed between Martha Johnson and the creature we had transported, I now shared some part of it too. The drive back to Fort Carson took just under 10 hours. I stopped only once for gas and a tasteless sandwich that I barely touched. The newspaper clipping Alice had given me sat on the passenger seat, Martha's smiling face looking up at me from yellowed newsprint. Night had fallen by the time I reached the base. The guard at the checkpoint barely glanced at my ID before waving me through. The parking lot near my barracks was mostly empty, a few trucks and sedans belonging to soldiers who weren't on night duty or weekend passes. I grabbed my duffel and the newspaper clipping, walking heavily up the stairs to my floor. The hallway lights buzzed with that weird electric noise you only hear in military buildings. Not quite right, not quite broken. The burn on my shoulder had started aching again about an hour outside of Colorado Springs, a dull pain that got worse with each step toward my room. When I opened the door, I wasn't alone. Colonel Hayes sat on the edge of Ryan's empty bunk, hands clasped between his knees. He wore his uniform even though it was after hours, every button and badge perfectly placed. He didn't stand when I entered. "You went to Elko," he said. Not a question. I closed the door behind me and dropped my duffel on the floor. "Yes, sir." Find anything interesting? I considered lying, claiming I just wanted to see the house again. But Hayes had that look in his eyes. He already knew the answers to his questions. He was testing me. I met a neighbor who knew Martha Johnson, I said, pulling the newspaper clipping from my pocket. She gave me this. Hayes took the clipping, examining it without surprise. Alice Winters, he said. She's been there a long time. You know her? We keep track of anyone connected to that house. He handed the clipping back. What else did you learn? I hesitated, then reached into my wallet and pulled out a small photograph. Alice had let me take a picture of the portrait showing Martha Johnson's yellow reflecting eyes. This is Martha Johnson, I said, passing it to Hayes, the real one who disappeared in 1963. Hayes studied the photo for a long time. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes changed, like he'd just found what he was looking for. Her eyes, I continued. They reflect yellow, just like the entity's eyes, Hayes finished. Just like what you saw in the mirror at that gas station. I sat down heavily on my bunk. So what does it mean? Was she already like whatever we transported? Or did that thing take her form after she disappeared? Hayes placed the photo carefully on the bed beside him. Some people are more susceptible to their influence. The Johnsons lived on that land for generations. The entity probably chose her because of her connection to the place. What place? That house? Elko? That entire region. Long before European settlers arrived, the Shoshone and Paiute considered that area sacred or forbidden. The translations differ. Hayes straightened his already perfect uniform jacket. The entity is drawn to people with connections to the land, people whose families have history there. I felt sick to my stomach. Is that why I was chosen for this mission? Hayes looked right at me. Your grandfather, James Wilson, participated in the 1963 transport. I was stunned. I'd never known my grandfather. He died before I was born. My mom rarely talked about him, and when she did, it was with a weird mix of sadness and worry. That's not possible, I said automatically. Your grandfather was Army, stationed at Fort Ord in California. He was part of a four-man team that picked up the entity, then appearing as a middle-aged man, from a location in western Utah and transported it to the house in Elko. My grandfather never mentioned anything like this to my mother. I would have heard about it. Hayes's face relaxed a bit. He wouldn't have talked about it. Couldn't really. The experience really messed him up. What do you mean? Hayes stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark parade ground below. The entity, it takes an interest in certain people, marks them as it marked you. Your grandfather was one of those people. What happened to him? Hayes turned back to face me. He committed suicide 13 months after the mission, September 18th, 1964. The news hit me hard. My mother had always said her father died young, but never how. When I'd asked as a child, she would change the subject. Later I learned it was better not to ask. Why wasn't I told about this connection before the mission? Would you have believed me? Hayes asked, echoing his words from our previous meeting. Would you have agreed to go? He was right. I wouldn't have believed it. So what happens now? I asked. Hayes returned to his seat on the empty bunk. You have a choice to make, Sergeant Wilson. 2 options. He held up one finger. Option 1. You join a specialized unit that deals with these phenomena. Small group, highly classified work. You'd learn more about these entities, help manage their interactions with our world. A second finger joined the first. Option 2. You accept reassignment to a standard posting far from here. Before you go, you undergo memory suppression treatment. It doesn't erase everything, but it dulls the experiences, makes them feel like dreams or stories someone told you once. Most people who transport the entity choose this option. Your teammate Ryan chose this option last week. That explained Ryan's abrupt transfer. And Sean? Jacob? Jacob chose option 1. He's currently training with the specialized unit. Sean? Hayes paused. Sean disappeared 3 days after your return. We're still looking for him. The room felt suddenly colder. Disappeared how? Left the base without authorization. His car was found at a bus station in Denver, but there's no record of him purchasing a ticket. His bank accounts haven't been touched. Hayes's voice remained flat, clinical. This happens sometimes with those who are marked. They try to run, but there's nowhere to go. I thought about the burning on my shoulder, the yellow eyes I sometimes saw watching me from shadows, the fine gray dust that appeared on my sheets. Was this my future? Joining some secret military unit hunting monsters? Having my memories partially erased? Or disappearing like Sean, running from something I couldn't escape? I need time to think, I said. Hayes nodded. You have 48 hours to decide. He stood and walked to the door, then stopped. One more thing, Sergeant. The mark on your shoulder. It's going to get worse before it gets better. If you start seeing her not just in dreams or reflections, but standing in front of you as real as I am now, call this number right away. He handed me a business card with only a phone number printed on it. No name, no agency. Day or night, he added, no matter which option you choose. After Hayes left, I sat on my bunk for a long time, staring at the newspaper clipping and the photo of Martha Johnson with her yellow reflecting eyes. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the third ring. Thomas, is everything all right? You never call this late. I'm fine, Mom. I wanted to ask you something about Grandpa James. The line went silent for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, her voice came back, lower and more careful. What about him? What do you remember about him? How he died? Another long pause. Why are you asking about this now? It's important, Mom. Please. She sighed, a soft static through the phone. He was sick, Thomas. Mentally. The doctors called it paranoid delusions back then. What kind of delusions? He believed he was being followed by something that wasn't human. He'd talk about someone with yellow eyes who knew all his secrets. Her voice cracked slightly. We thought he was crazy. Everyone did. He spent some time in a VA hospital, but it didn't help. One day he just couldn't take it anymore. Yellow eyes that saw right through him, just like Martha had known about Fallujah. Did he ever mention a house? In Elko, Nevada? How did you know about that? The question came out sharp, surprised. He was obsessed with that house toward the end. Kept saying he needed to go back there, that something was waiting for him. She paused. Thomas, what's going on? How do you know these things? It's complicated, Mom. I can't really explain right now. I wanted to tell her everything, but how could I make her understand when I barely understood it myself? You're scaring me, she said softly. I'm okay. Really. I just needed to know about Grandpa James. I tried to make my voice sound reassuring. I should go. It's late. Thomas, I'll call you tomorrow, Mom, I promise. I ended the call and lay back on my bunk, staring at the ceiling. The fan spun slowly above me. My shoulder hurt more now, like something was pushing against it from the inside. Outside, the base was quiet. Most soldiers were either asleep or gone for the night. I closed my eyes, thinking I'd have trouble sleeping, but I was so tired from the drive and everything I'd learned that I knocked out quickly. I dreamed of my grandfather, who I'd only seen in photos. In the dream, he stood in front of the Victorian house in Elko, much younger than in any picture I'd seen, wearing an army uniform like mine. A tall person with really pale skin and yellow eyes stood in the doorway behind him, with one long-fingered hand on his shoulder right where mine hurt. I woke up suddenly, sitting up in my bunk. The room was dark, except for the dim glow of the exit sign coming through the small window above the door. My watch showed I'd been asleep for just over 3 hours. Something felt off. I looked around the empty room, half expecting to see yellow eyes watching me from the corner. Nothing moved in the darkness. I lay back down, and my head hit something hard under my pillow. I sat up again and lifted the pillow to find a small brass key, just like the one Martha had pulled from her pocket at the Victorian house. I picked it up carefully. It was old, smooth in places from wear, with a pattern on the head that I couldn't make out in the dim light. I turned on my bedside lamp to see it better. The pattern looked like symbols similar to the ones Hayes had shown me in the photos of the restored house. Curved lines and sharp angles that didn't look like any alphabet I knew. The key felt cool in my hand, but as I held it, I knew for sure it would open the front door of 637 Juniper Street. I also somehow knew I would need this key in exactly 60 years. I put the key in the pocket of my fatigues hanging over the chair beside my bed, knowing it would still be there in the morning, that it would stay with me no matter where I put it. The burning on my shoulder felt better when I did this, as if the key and the mark were connected, two parts of the same thing. I lay back down and turned off the light, but I couldn't fall back asleep. I stared into the darkness, thinking about my grandfather, about Martha Johnson with her yellow reflecting eyes, about the choice Hayes had given me. Two options, neither of which felt right. Join a unit hunting monsters, or have my memories dulled and live not knowing. What if there was a third option? 6 months after the mission, I made my decision. 2 days of staring at Hayes' business card had turned into a week, then a month, then multiple months of indecision as I returned to my regular duties. The burning on my shoulder never fully disappeared, but it did fade enough that I could ignore it most days. The yellow eyes appeared less frequently in mirrors and shadows, and I almost convinced myself that what had happened in Elko might eventually become nothing more than an unusual memory. Almost. I made an appointment to see Hayes on a Tuesday morning in early spring. His office was exactly as I remembered it. Plain, practical, with those same manila folders arranged in neat stacks on his desk. "I'm declining both options," I said after he closed the door behind me. Hayes didn't look surprised. He sat back in his chair, hands folded on the desk, eyes watching me with that same calculating look I'd gotten used to. "I want out completely," I continued. "Honorable discharge. You have nearly 3 years left on your current commitment, Sergeant Wilson," Hayes said, his tone neutral. "I know. And you believe we'll just let you walk away after what you've experienced?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I think you will. Because whatever this is, this entity, this situation, it's been happening for a long time before me. And it'll keep happening long after. You've managed it for hundreds of years without me." Hayes was quiet for a bit. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the desk toward me. "Your discharge papers, already processed. You just need to sign." I stared at the document, unable to hide my surprise. "You knew I'd choose this." "I suspected. Your grandfather tried to do the same thing." Hayes' expression softened slightly. He wasn't permitted to leave. Things were different then. The program was less humane in its approach. I picked up the pen Hayes offered and signed the paper. "Is that why he killed himself?" "Partly, perhaps." Hayes took the signed form back. "Your official separation date is 2 weeks from today. That should give you time to make arrangements." I started to get up, but Hayes put his hand up to stop me. "Thomas," he said, using my first name for the first time, "this doesn't end with you walking away. The mark she left, it's still there. It will always be there. You should know that none of the transporters who've been marked have ever lived completely normal lives afterward. I'll take my chances. Of course you will." Hayes opened another drawer and removed a sealed manila envelope. "On your last day, I'll give you this. Don't open it unless you start seeing her again, not in dreams or reflections, but standing in front of you, as real as I am now." "What's in it?" "Insurance," Hayes said simply. "Now go get your affairs in order, Sergeant. Your military career is almost over." 2 weeks passed quickly. I sold or donated most of my belongings, keeping only what would fit in my truck. I called my mother to let her know I was leaving the army, dodging her questions about my sudden decision. I didn't tell her about the mark, the dreams, or what I'd learned about my grandfather. On my last day, I signed the final paperwork, turned in my remaining gear, and walked through the base one last time in civilian clothes. Hayes was waiting by my truck in the parking lot. He handed me the sealed envelope. "Don't open this unless you have no other choice," he repeated, his voice grave. "And Thomas, if you do need to open it, don't wait too long." I put the envelope in my glove box without saying anything. Hayes looked at me for a second, then nodded and walked away. I never saw him again. 3 days later, I got to my uncle's cabin in Montana. Uncle Mike had died 2 years ago and left the place to my mom. She didn't want a cabin so far from town and was happy to let me stay there until the market gets better. The cabin was in the woods with some open land around it, and you could see mountains from there. There was a dirt road to the highway that worked fine except in heavy snow. No neighbors nearby. It was quiet and exactly what I needed. I spent the first week cleaning, fixing things, and checking out the property. The work kept me busy, fixing pipes, replacing boards on the porch, clearing bushes. I was so tired each night that I fell right to sleep without dreaming about yellow eyes or that old house. My shoulder hardly burned anymore. The small brass key with the weird marks stayed in my pocket, not doing anything. I started thinking maybe Hayes was wrong. Maybe I could just forget what happened in Elko. For 3 weeks, things were normal. I got into a routine. Coffee on the porch in the morning watching deer, cutting wood or hiking in the afternoon, and reading my uncle's books at night by lamplight when I turned off the power. Then the dreams came back. The first one was simple. I was standing in a field of tall grass moving in the wind. Far away, someone in a blue dress was watching me. I knew it was Martha, even though I couldn't see her face clearly. She raised her hand like she was saying hi, and I woke up. The next night, the dream was longer. Same field, same person, but this time she walked toward me slowly. Her face got clearer with each step. Her eyes looked yellow in the dream. When she got close enough to touch me, she smiled and said, "It won't be long now." I woke up sweating. Every night after that, the dreams got more detailed. Martha walking with me on a dirt road. Martha sitting at my kitchen table in the cabin. Martha standing at the end of my bed, leaning over me, whispering things I couldn't quite hear, but somehow understood. Promises, threats, secrets. Then I started finding the dust. Gray powder on my sheets when I woke up, just like what fell from that weird stone in my barracks. At first it was just a few bits, easy to think it was dirt from outside. But it got worse each day until one morning I woke up with my bed covered in it, like something had turned to dust while I slept. I took off the sheets, showered, and tried to tell myself there was a normal explanation. But when I looked in the bathroom mirror to shave, I stopped with the razor halfway to my face. In the mirror, my eyes had changed. My brown eyes now looked yellow in the bathroom light, like a cat's eyes, or like Martha's eyes, like what that thing really looked like. I stepped back from the mirror, blinking hard. When I looked again, my eyes were normal, just regular brown, showing nothing but how scared I was. But I knew what I'd seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch with a flashlight and a bottle of whiskey, with Hayes' sealed envelope on the table next to me. Around 3 in the morning, I finally opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with GPS coordinates written in neat handwriting, a location somewhere in northern New Mexico. Below the coordinates was a short note in the same handwriting. "If she finds you, go here. Others like you will be waiting." The next morning, I packed my truck. I didn't know what waited for me at those coordinates, but I knew I couldn't stay at the cabin any longer. The dreams were getting worse. The dust showing up in larger amounts, and twice more I'd caught yellow eyes looking back at me from mirrors. I drove south through Montana, watching the forests change to drier land as I crossed into Wyoming and then Colorado. I stopped only when I needed gas, food, or a few hours of restless sleep at roadside motels. The burning on my shoulder had come back, stronger than before, reminding me of Martha's touch and whatever link had formed between us. In southern Colorado, I pulled over at a scenic overlook to stretch my legs and clear my head. The view went for miles, red rocks and scrubland under a big blue sky. I leaned on the railing, trying to figure out what was happening to me. The thing hadn't been caught or stopped by the military's containment plan. It had simply used them, used us, like it had used others before. Every 60 years it let itself be moved back to that house in Elko for reasons I still didn't get. And along the way it looked into certain people, saw their darkest secrets, and marked them somehow. My grandfather had been one of those people. Now I was too. Was that why he'd killed himself 13 months after his mission? Would that be my fate as well? I thought about the others Hayes had mentioned. Jacob, who joined the special unit. Ryan, who'd chosen to forget. Sean, who'd disappeared. And now there were others like me, waiting in New Mexico. People who had moved the thing in previous cycles and lived to tell about it. How many were there? How long had they survived with this mark? And what did they know that might help me understand what was happening to me? This wasn't a fight I could win with weapons or plans. Whatever waited for me in New Mexico was my only hope for understanding, and maybe surviving, what the thing had done to me. I got back in my truck and kept going south, crossing into New Mexico late that afternoon. The landscape changed again, more striking now, mesas and buttes rising from the desert floor, tough plants clinging to red soil. The burning on my shoulder throbbed with each beat of my heart. As I crossed the state line, movement in my rearview mirror caught my eye. I looked up and froze. Martha was sitting in my back seat wearing the same faded blue dress she'd worn in Elko. She smiled at me, her eyes shining yellow in the mirror. I spun around to look at the back seat. It was empty. No Martha. No sign anyone had been there at all. When I looked back at the road, I had to swerve to avoid drifting into oncoming traffic. I pulled over at the next rest area, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. This was exactly what Hayes had warned me about. Seeing her not just in dreams or reflections, but as if she was right there. I reached into my pocket and grabbed the brass key that had shown up under my pillow months ago. It felt hot against my skin, opposite to the burning on my shoulder. Whatever connection existed between me and the thing was growing stronger. The coordinates Hayes had given me were still several hours away. I had to get there before these sightings, or whatever they were, became more than I could handle. I started the truck again and pulled back onto the highway, watching the New Mexico landscape roll past and trying not to look in the rearview mirror too often. The key in my pocket cooled as the miles passed, but stayed there, reminding me that my journey with Martha was far from over.